My name's Sam. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I don't have an easy life. I'm not asking for pity or for you to feel bad for me. I'm just simply stating the facts. Only person I have in my life is my mother. And my mother has an even worse life than I do. We're struggling day to day. I had to get a job, my mom works 2 jobs, and we have to work countless hours just to survive. My father abandoned me when I was born. My grandparents, they don't want anything to do with me, and the only person that helped survive us, well, was my grand aunt, aka my mother's aunt. She helped out my mom when she was pregnant, and if it wasn't for her, there's no telling where we would be. Well, can you guys imagine my surprise after almost 2.5 decades when this weird-looking man is at my front porch, and I find out that it's no other than my father. And guess what he wants? I'm 22 and female, and I'm not sure where I should begin now that my dad has returned. So much has happened in my 22 years of life that I'm unsure if I would be able to tell everything that both my mom and I have been through. But I promise to try my best to share my story. You need to understand how complex my emotions have become after my dad's sudden return. It's made our lives much more complicated than they already were. I'll start by sharing my earliest memories of my mom's confession about my dad, who left months before I was born and was never seen or heard from again for many years. Mom's never fully explained what really happened or why Dad did what he did. I've always assumed that she might never have understood it herself. After all, she herself was going through so much. It would have been impossible trying to understand a fully grown man not taking responsibility for the pregnancy. I've always wondered this whenever I think about him. How come someone claims to have to love a woman so much, only to leave her in the moment she needed him the most? Is it something inherent in every man? I've always feared doing that on my own. That is one of the reasons why I've never ventured out of my comfort zone and tried to date someone. I'll begin with what my mom has told me about her own story. It begins when my mom was just 21 years of age and 3 months pregnant with me. Although they talked about the cosmos and philosophies and my mother looked for homely foundations, there was a great understanding between them. They were college sweethearts, after all. The connection between them was natural. In his passionate moments, he always encouraged her fantasies of their potential family. My mom has always assumed he never really understood what she wanted from him, and she never understood in time. Well, he wanted to be free of all responsibilities for as long as possible, and that is where they fell apart. In one of those moments of misunderstanding emotions, they took less precautions. She was 21, had recently finished her graduation, and was pregnant with me. On top of all, my biological father had just announced he was not ready for the baby, or for any responsibility for that matter. In a fit of passion, argument came by, and about the same he suggested getting rid of the baby. Offended, she declined that idea, and for his part he packed his bag and left. Just like that. My mom often repeats that she still remembers what he said before he left. A confession that he did not want to be tied down in a relationship just because she was being, and I quote, so stubborn. They were still unmarried, so it was a significant concern for my religious grandparents when my mom turned up at their door. Pregnant with a child whose father wanted nothing to do with the situation. If you can imagine, a bad reaction makes it even worse. That's how they reacted to my already frightened mother's face. They left her just to stay with them for a while. However, just like my biological father suggested, they said she would need to apologize to God and get rid of the baby. It was wrong. It was cruel to her. Instead of following through with such ideas, she left their home. Whenever I hear this story, I often think she would have just gotten rid of the baby. It would have saved her from so much heartache. To be turned down by your own parents at a time you're so vulnerable. No wonder my mom's grown so kind and loving to me and everyone around her. Her aunt was a bit more tolerant of the entire idea of premarital sex and pregnancy. She took Mom under her wing, but that still did not make her life any easier. My grand aunt often received calls from my grandparents who often inquired about the situation of my mom. It was not out of concern. They just wanted to know if she agreed to get rid of the baby or not, and as the delivery date came near, their phone calls lessened and lessened. By the time I was born, they had just stopped calling. They rejected her, just as they assumed she had rejected God. I'm really not sure how I feel about that. It is difficult to imagine such a kind mom in that situation. No partner to take care of her, no parent to be there for her, and only an aunt who maintained her own distance. She was in a very complicated state. As she recovered her health, her aunt started suggesting she finds a job at an apartment to stay in because her own children were coming to stay with her. After a while, those suggestions started to wear on her nerves. It was, in her weekend, still recovering state, she began searching for menial jobs in a cheap apartment. Fortunately, she found both very soon. The apartment one that we still live in to this day is not the most gorgeous place to be. Heck, during rainy days, it doesn't even seem livable. But this has become our home, something my mom fought tooth and nail to keep in her early 20s when she was around my age. She often says when she was younger, she could not believe it took so little for her parents to leave her on her own. Then she shrugs her shoulders and gets on with whichever she was doing. Who cares? It's been years. Well, I do. I care. My mom has done so much for me when no one wanted to do anything for her. How can I not care? I despise everyone who rejected her. I despise my father and my grandparents who never bothered to check on her. And after all, it was not just the pregnancy. She struggled after that too, for many, many years to come. Although she did find a job in an apartment, it took great pains in keeping them both, all the while taking care of a newborn baby. Me. She took me to her job, and the manager or boss often yelled at her whenever I cried. Because of me, she lost several jobs. Not everyone's like the wailing of a baby. Personally, I would not have liked it either, yet she managed to keep 2 by the time she turned 23. As a 2-year-old baby, I was much more tolerable. I sometimes helped her cope with everything that was going on around her, and one would expect her to get fed up with everything that was happening to her because of me. But no, she didn't. If anything, I think it was her struggling that brought us closer. She often says during the toughest night she looked at me for hope. In my innocent smiles and giggles, she found it. Well, it helps that we're still struggling, and it also helps in understanding where my mom once stood. Honestly, there have been many moments in my life where I decided I do not need anyone else in my life. My mother is enough. I'll take care of her just like she's taken care of me. Finishing school was not easy, not at all. My classmates had both parents and I had one. Sometimes even Mom could not make it, so whenever she arrived late, I would be confused between 2 completely different emotions. Anger, petulance, and on one hand sympathy, and sadness on the other. Even as a child, I was aware she needed sleep. She always looked like she wasn't getting any, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Her shoulders drooped with burden, and her cheeks looked bony. I have clear memories of those days, and I don't think I will ever forget them. Sometimes I remember back to the times when I desperately needed a dad. A dad just like every other kid I knew had. I often threw fits over this as well, not knowing how much it hurt or bothered her. After a while, I stopped. I knew I was not getting any dad. Obviously, this was hard for me to accept, and because of that, my reaction to the kids who made fun of me for my father's absence were oftentimes violent. After a couple of scoldings from my mother, I stopped it. I did not bother with anything or anyone after that, and all I wanted every time was my mom. Everyone else just seemed fake, just like my mother's aunt. Finishing high school was difficult. Mom was struggling day and night just to pay for the school through those 2 years, and without telling her, I picked up a little job after school hours. The job paid little, but it was enough to pay for daily breakfast. When Mom finally found out about it, she was upset. It was only because I promised to study extra hard that she agreed, and she always seemed hesitant about it. But mostly sad. I decided I would not forgive anyone who reduced both of us to this, because I was so young. The boss took advantage of my inexperience, and he made me work extra for the same amount of money he was paying other employees of his. It used to anger me, but I stayed for the sake of my mom. Had I told her, she probably would have hauled me out of there right away, no questions even asked. Slowly but surely, I gained experience, and I left that work and went for others. I finished high school with good grades, but did not bother looking for higher studies. We could not have paid for any of the courses or college anyways. My best bet and comfortable enough life was work. By the time I turned 19, I had picked up a couple of jobs to support my mom and improve my financial situation. I must admit, it was never been easier on us the longest time I can think of. When I'm unable to fill the gaps, my mom brings in her own explanations. Sometimes I wish I do not know anything she tells me, for it fills me with nothing more than hatred, anger, and, resentment. Sometimes I feel glad she tells me everything, and it helps us bring us closer. It helps me in realizing she is the most important person to me. No one else can even compare. That is one of the reasons why the thoughts of my dad became less frequent the more I aged. That's one of the reasons why, when I came home late after a particularly bad day at work, I was surprised to find a man who looked like an aged copy of the young man I had seen next to one of my mom's older photos, standing right there in front of our little apartment. His hair was disheveled and his clothes were old and ragged. He looked old, older than my calculations told me he should look like. For the longest minute of my life, I was too stunned to speak. I saw him interacting with my mother, nearly on his knees, for whatever reason, clasping his hands together over and over again, realizing what it could possibly mean. I furrowed my brows, just to look at my mother in a way. My mom saw me and tried to explain the situation to me. The man, my biological father, that is, turned to me with a surprised face, and he clearly was not expecting to see me. Someone he had so heartlessly was ready to dismiss even before she was born. Without saying another word, I simply grabbed my mother's hand and brought her inside. I did not forget to slam the door shut in his face. A mean expression evident on my face because I hated him. I wanted him to know that very well. I'll come back with an update, guys, once I've understood the situation better. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Oh man, today's story is a wild ride. It looks like the father is back in the picture, but what could he possibly want? I've compiled all 3 updates, and I am so excited about update number 2 because it has such a twist in it. If you guys are new to the channel, the best way to support me is so simple. Hit that subscribe button for daily videos, and that's all you gotta do. It's free. Let's jump into update number 1. I'd like to tell you one thing. I've tried making friends. It has just never worked out. Something has always been amiss. Perhaps that's because I've lived with my mother for so long. Everyone else's mannerisms seem uncomfortable and incompatible to me. To be honest, I never really put much effort into making that possible either. I just held on to my mom, just like she held on to me. That's one of the reasons why the very idea of Jeff being back in my mom's life made me so mad. Not only has he come back after 21 years, but he's also having the audacity to try to evoke my mom's long-dead feelings for him. He has said some things that have triggered my mom's senses. By the time the clock hits 10 the same night, Jeff visited us after such a long time. I've called her counselor's phone 6 times, and it's she who brings my mom back from a possible attack. Although she falls asleep soon after, I stay awake to keep a watch on any visitor or Jeff. About my mom's situation, she was 40 when I first realized she needed help. I do not really remember what the reason for the reaction was, but I remember immediately reaching out to a high school classmate's sister who worked as a counselor for poor people. I told her whatever I could possibly tell her. She agreed to meet my mom easily enough, although her fees weren't as expensive, they still were feeling pretty heavy on my shoulders. To keep up with it all, I picked up other jobs, and Mom had a hard time accepting the need, but eventually she agreed. In the last 2 years, it went well. She started relaxing more, and there was less stress on her shoulders. I noticed a change in her, however. After Jeff's recent appearance, it all feels like it's been for nothing. I'm not going to lose hope so quickly, but Jeff needs to go. I don't care for his reason for coming back. I advise Mom the next day to not let anyone in, and she nods her head in a promise. She's promised to tell me whatever she knows about Jeff's recent appearance when I come back. I tell her that she needs not to. After all, it does make these unwanted memories flood back in. It makes everything more horrible for her, but she insisted on telling me. Throughout the time I was at my job, I thought about it, and I created different scenarios, but in none of them I felt sorry for him or any possible bad situation he could be in. How did he find my mom after all these years? Well, I'm not sure. But I'm sure Mom has some answers about it. Eager as hell, I reach home to hear the same. He had revealed that he found her in the supermarket a week or so ago, and he promised the meeting was accidental, which is why he did not recognize my mother right away. To confirm his suspicions, he followed her to the apartment, then, as a stalker would, he followed my mom to her job, and once even to the counselor's office. By this time, he realized she was indeed his ex-girlfriend, and desperate and poor, he followed her to our apartment on the day I saw him first. He was begging her to let him in and constantly asking for forgiveness, and Mom had replied, nothing. So his voice grew rough and he acted mean, even if it was not like that when Mom knew him intimately. I came at the right time, otherwise he would have clasped her into his dirty arms. I must admit, I'm still a bit speechless. I mean, for one thing, I'm conflicted about his return. I don't understand anything. There's so much to take in, and yet I know one thing's for certain. I despise the very sight of him. The fact that he came back only because he has nowhere else to go made me feel something, ugly towards him. There was a time when my mom struggled to find a place for herself despite not having done anything wrong. If she had such difficulty finding sincere support, what right Jeff had to demand kindness from the same people he dismissed so quickly in his youth? I'm honest when I say I'm ready to go and hurt him. It's just my mom's tired face that has stopped me. I feed her and ask her to sleep. The outside is not safe for her for a while. She needs to stay away from that man, and I lock the door and shut the windows. Update number 2. Hey guys, so it's been 2 weeks. Mom has met him. Well, it was not planned. He had come to our place in my absence and again tried to reconcile with her. Although not entirely, she did follow through with some of the rules that I set forward. She did not allow him inside, nor did she allow him to touch her. This reaction, however, made him more desperate. He started crying and begged on his knees for pity. When Mom refused it, he began his story to gain more sympathy. He thought he would receive sympathy, but honestly, both my mom and I have run out of it. After leaving Mom, he had left for the northern side, rarely keeping contact with anyone but his parents. There, he lived like a reckless fool. He did look for some job, and with his degree, he was able to secure a good enough, even. But he was still the same man and left the place within a few months, and after that, he wandered aimlessly. He took up odd jobs whenever he was short on money, or he was provided for by his parents, and compared to us, he managed to get by for a long time. After a while, he settled into a small town in a very comfortable place, and his loneliness he picked up a bad habit. One of these bad habits was drugs. He did jobs or asked for money from his parents and paid for the drugs like that, and in this group of drug-addicted people, he found a woman with whom he eventually engaged. I'm not entirely sure if this woman was also an addict. However, this information was the most grating on my mom's nerves, and it only bothered her even more when he revealed he has a baby with the woman. How he even went that far, I'm not entirely sure, but he paid for that dearly. Unlike my mom, this woman was not really in love with him. She was there for something else entirely, and when she found out he was not going to take responsibility for the baby, she brought this to her lawyer's dad's attention. After that, well, it was bad news for him. He had to provide child support, and it was expensive. He further created a bad image for himself when he replied that he did not really care about meeting the baby. I'm not sure I can describe the feeling when I heard all of this from my mom. Jeff had not lost his way one time. 21 years ago, he is inherently like that. He doesn't like responsibility because he fears it. That's probably why he's never made an effort to talk to me. He doesn't really care about me. All he needs is someone to look out for him. Now that his parents are no longer alive, he is, in short, pathetic. If you're wondering about the reason he left us, I'm not sure I'll be able to give you a clear explanation about it. Jeff no longer remembers why he left Mom. He simply replies he did not want responsibility, so there you have it. Meeting this man twice has reduced my mom to the exact state she's been 2 years ago. It's gone bad enough that she had to meet her counselor twice in the last week alone. Besides that, she has trouble sleeping as well. This means that the conversation between both of us have been reduced to just little mumbles that sometimes sound useless. Honestly, I know what to do. It's clear from the reactions from both of us that neither of us want Jeff around, and after realizing this, it's easier to make a decision, right? I'll come back with more information sometime soon. I've simply refused to budge under the sudden presence of my dad. Updates number 3. For some time after that, Jeff did not visit us again. I assumed it to be because he feels embarrassed after revealing everything that he did. However, I find only later that he has been dealing with long-time sickness and is sometimes reducing his basic motor skills. His sudden insistence on wanting a place at our home and efforts to mend his relationship with my mother make more sense now. However, in the end, it only makes him sound like a loser, a deeply self-preserving individual. It's just that he is even bad at that. I don't want to feel scorn for him, but I do. I just hate him that much. His sudden presence does not really make sense anymore. Even my mom is not sure what to make of the entire thing. The time at this job is not really that great either. My boss has been particularly demanding, and on top of that, he has increased the working hours because it is a busy month. The pay has increased only a little. Regardless, it helps in balancing out our livelihood. All of this, in addition to Jeff's sudden presence, has impacted me too. I feel irritated, to be honest, and sometimes I am feeling very close to snapping at my coworkers even though none of them have said anything or done anything to me. One of those tough days, I come back home to find Jeff at our door again, and this time he's no longer crying or begging on his knees. Though he seems sickly and exhausted, he does not shy away from using the physical advantage he has over her. He tries to get in, citing reasons that he needs a, quote, rest, and he has nowhere to go, etc. My mother does not allow him in. This entire confrontation attracts the attention of our neighbors and something I've always tried to avoid. The moment people start gossiping, the landlord wants you to get out. I make a run for them, and I reach them and try to shove the man from the door, and his body is both smelly and warm. He's definitely recovering from a fever, and I don't feel concerned about that at all, and the only thing I can think of is that he has hurt my mom and that he's ready to hurt us more, if only to find a place in our home. I ask for help from my neighbors, who graciously come forward to help us in the situation. Jeff roars something about kindness and humanity, and I refuse to listen to that nonsense. Where was this said humanity when my mom was struggling, and when she needed him the most? When he tries to escalate the situation, I just call the cops. It is clear from his behavior he wants to create some unnecessary situation. A situation that can be avoided, and I can see my landlord is standing near the gate, watching it all silently. I just don't want to lose this apartment, and we will have absolutely nowhere to go. The police took a while to reach us, and when they do, they bring him in immediately, and by the end of the entire thing, I find myself seriously affected, and Mom sitting on the edge of our shared bed. She doesn't speak for a long while, and I assume she doesn't want to talk. Our landlord, in his loud, booming voice, repeats his rules of living in his apartment, and I promise him that nothing like this will happen again. He makes me promise 4 times before leaving. I really don't know how to describe the entire thing, but by the end of it all, I vowed to not let that man come anywhere near us again. The next day with my mom, I fled for a restraining order against him, and Jeff is still locked up, so we don't see him at all for weeks. My mom has made no comments about finding that man anywhere, so I have assumed he has either left or he's busy dealing with the police. In the aftermath of the entire thing, I suggested my mom leave her job for a while. Her own health, both physical and mental, is important to me. She hesitates in taking up the suggestion, fearing that it'll get harder on me. However, after a little coaxing, she follows through. It is indeed true it's going to get harder on me, but for a while I just needed a bit of rest. She's been through so much, and I'm sure she needs some proper sleep, and I've known that since I was a child. Eventually she'll pick up something again, and she says it helps her understand everything better. As I've said, we do not hear anything from Jeff again. There was a little chance of seeing him, especially after the restraining order, but it's still surprising that he's nowhere to be found. The last that we saw him, he was still sick. So I've been assuming he's either still locked up or in a hospital somewhere. I must admit sometimes I feel conscious and curious about him. Even after all this, he was still my biological father, you know. If not anything, he owed both of us an explanation. Even if we had not accepted him, at least our decade-long struggle would have had an answer. But obviously, no. All that mattered to this man is freedom. It's going to eat him alive, too. After all, wasn't the reason he engaged with that woman whose name he never bothered to give my mother? She mattered so little to him, and I sometimes wonder how much we do. Probably nothing. That's why we fear nothing about him, not even from any hospital, and in the days after he leaves us, we take our time in healing with the entire abrupt situation. Mom continues with her therapy sessions, and after a while, there's a visible difference in her health. In some ways, we fall into the same routine that we're engaged in before Jeff came around. How do I explain my complicated feelings during this time? I've had to do so much thinking throughout the whole ordeal that when it finally seems to end, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about Jeff. Sometimes, when I think back to his physical condition, I do pity him. But at the same moment, I realize that his behavior has not changed much from what my mom has told me about him. He's not the kind person you can trust or come around without sacrificing a large part of yourself. After weeks of nothing from Jeff, and just when we were going back to our normal lives, the news of his passing, well, it came from our landlord. He had been visiting his own mother when he saw Jeff at the hospital in such a state that he knew that he would not survive. By the time that he left the hospital, well, Jeff's bed was empty, and I'm not entirely sure how I'm supposed to talk about it. My mom's gone completely stoic, and there's very little reaction at all, from her. But from me, I feel somewhat conflicted because part of me is relieved that we'll never have to see him again. And there's another part of me that's struggling to comprehend the finality of his absence. I saw my dad after so long worse than what he had been 2 decades ago. We know little about his death, and to be honest, we don't dig for that information either. I think we both have the right to keep ourselves safe from that, however. After so much, we have decided to come to accept Jeff as a part of our past that we needed to move on from. After all, if Dad died that way he wanted to, alone and without any responsibilities, we have every right to move on from the past with each other. Well, guys, this story, it was just growing increasingly sad, and even more sad towards the end, when we find out about OP's biological father and he eventually ends up passing away alone in a cold hospital bed. But it just seems like OP and her mother have been through so much. I mean, her mom didn't even want anything to do with the father because she just seemed like she was emotionally done with it. She went through countless therapy for years and years, and this story just had a lot going on. Well, I was reading the comment section, and to my surprise, there's a lot of people that have similar stories to this. That's why I always try to let you guys know. You never know what someone's going through, and that's why I always say it's cool to be kind, because I really mean it. You never know what someone's going through. So guys, let's go ahead and drop in the comment section down below a little bit of advice maybe you want to share if you've been in a similar situation. If not, well, let's just give some advice and opinions on this story. So guys, go ahead and drop your comments. I hope you enjoyed the story today. If you do want more daily videos, the best way to get them is so simple. All you do is subscribe to the channel, and I upload every single day. I hope you guys have an amazing day. I'll catch you tomorrow. And remember, it is cool to be kind. See ya.